Brahms here, coming to you live from Surprise in Arizona. I hope you're having a super fantastic sparkling day. Welcome to Before the Dirt Nap podcast, number 1924, Wacky Wednesday. Oh, what a great day it's been. Yes, great day. It's been an awesome day. It's been a little wild today, a little wild and wacky. I did not get to, okay, so short political thing, impartial, completely. I didn't care who won. I really don't. I wore purple yesterday for a reason. It's half blue, it's half purple, half red, half blue. I don't care. But then I was set up till 1:30 this morning watching the results come in. I don't know what it is. I don't like listening to any of the campaigning stuff that goes on. But when it comes to election night results, I like to sit there and watch them coming in. And I'm not a numbers person. I don't like math. I know basic math pretty well. But when it comes to election results, I like to watch all the numbers coming in. And I still don't get how, like, California closed their polls and immediately it was awarded to Camilla. And I'm like, how? What? How does it? I still don't understand how any of that works. Like the predictions and all of that sort of stuff. No idea. 3% counted and it's already awarded to somebody. Although predicted that person's going to win in that state. And I'm like, but you still got 97% of the votes to come in. So I don't understand any of that. But anyway, so it's a wacky Wednesday today, trying to operate on like 3 hours of sleep because I didn't get to sleep till like 2 o'clock this morning. And of course, I was up at 5. So it's a crazy day. But tonight we are talking about Wacky Wednesday genealogy tips to spice up your research and how you can different wacky things that you can look at. And we're talking quirky, there's a lot of stuff here. So so here are some things that you can do. Number one, so these are just playful. These are just things that you can do to spice up your research. They are playful twists to research. So when you search using you can actually start searching using emojis, because things like flags or symbols are starting to show up in some newer digital archives, social media, and even family trees. Give them a try. See if anyone in your family tree has used them. And I've also, because I was looking at somebody's tree yesterday, and it was a DNA match, and so I was trying to figure out where they were coming in, and I noticed that we're on Ancestry, and in Ancestry you've got first and middle name, last name, and then you have the suffix. So a junior, a third, a fourth, a fifth, or whatever. But what this person had done is that they had stuck. They didn't do emojis, but you could do emojis this way, is that in the suffix thing, they had put M for maternal side and P on the paternal side. And then when they got to the grandparents, it was MG for maternal grandparents. Then M1G, no, M1 for M2 for second great grandparents, M3 for third great grandparents, and gone through that. So that, and what they had also done is that in the name area, they had put first and middle name and last name all in capitals. Everybody else was initial capital, lowercase. And so that when they were looking at a tree, they could see immediately where the main trunk line went, and they could pick it out from all the siblings and the cousins. They could pick out where their main trunk line was because of how they had used the suffix. I thought that was brilliant. But when I started seeing some emojis coming through, I was sort of like, well, maybe you could like put the emojis into the suffix area, into the suffix field, and then you know which line you're going. Who knows? Maybe you start putting them there. So just some weird and wacky things. Look up famous relatives. Find out if you're distantly related to someone famous by using Relative Finder, which is a tool on Family Search. Now, Relative Finder, I have to tell you, is really, really fun to use. And I think it's relativefinder.org. It is the coolest thing to use, but you have to make sure you verify everything. If you have a family tree on familysearch.org, at least, at minimum, 4 generations. It has to go back for at least 4 generations. So you're talking you, your parents, your grandparents, and your great-grandparents. It has to go back at minimum of 4. Then what it does is that when you go into relativefinder.org, you use your familytree.org login to get in, and it takes your profile that's in familytree.org, and it goes searching to see who you are related to. And it comes up with all sorts of categories. There's European royalty, there's first ladies, there's presidents, there's astronauts, there's authors, there's the Mayflowers on there. There's and because the Family Search is part of the Latter-day Saints, there's LDS, famous LDS people that are in there. There's politicians, there's entertainers, there's celebrities, there's all sorts of people that are in there. And this is how, but what you can also do is you can mimic somebody's profile. So if there's a certain person, if you want to see if you're related, you can go and they're in the familysearch.org system. You can go and find them, copy their file number, because everybody gets given a file number, put it into this thing and see if you're related to them. And sometimes you might have 4 or 5 different trees that all have that same person, and they've all got different numbers. So you might have to go through each one to find it. But then you can also do things like, instead of having yourself there, I could I took my mother-in-law's number and I put it in there, and she came up as the 9th great granddaughter of Richard Warren from the Mayflower, and direct descendant, 9th great granddaughter. And I was like, well, that's pretty cool. And it also came up with a second person that she was related to on the Mayflower. So when I mentioned it to one of her sons, one of my brother-in-laws, about this possible connection, because nothing is confirmed until you track, because some of the details that could be in the familysearch.org might be incorrect. There's times when I've come across some, and I'm going back through the thing, and I'm like, hang on, the mother was only 10 years old when I don't think that's right. So there is possibility for error in there. Like it says that I am related to Prince Charles on one side. Oh, sorry, King Charles now. King Charles on one side, and his late wife, Princess Diana. That shows that I have connections with them. Like, what was it? 14th cousin once removed or something. But until I can verify that information, it's a possible connection. This is the relative finder is not proof that you are related to these people. It is possible that you could be related to these people. It's a possibility. And so when I mentioned to my brother-in-laws about this connection to the Mayflower, the one I was talking to suddenly goes, oh yeah, Mum was always talking about that. He said, yeah, she always mentioned that she was a descendant from the Mayflower, but we could never find the connections or anything else. So now that I know that, I went through the part of her tree that I had, because it shows you how it shows you all the things. So of course I went into my tree that I had already set up with all of her information and her ancestors, and I'm going back through that, and I got to the son of the grandson of Richard Warren, and I'm sort of like, oh, well, now I know who his parents are, and I've got to make sure that this person is actually the son of his daughter, of Richard Warren's daughter and son-in-law. So that's kind of cool. I have traced them back. I have traced one part. Now on this one branch of the tree, it goes back and then it branches off. This branch goes to the Mayflower. This branch goes to the American Revolution. So, this one I've confirmed, but I'm looking for somebody to go over the details to make sure that I haven't missed anything and screwed something up. And this one here, I just have to prove that her 6th great grandfather, 7th great grandfather is actually the son of Richard Warren's daughter and son-in-law. And then we've got that connection. So you can find weird and wacky things on this, and that's relativefinder.org. And you use your familysearch.org login to log into the relative finder. And it's pretty cool because you can take people from your tree and distant relatives and all that and plop their number in there and see if there's a connection to somebody famous. You never know. And like I said, you have to verify the information first. Because like I said, I've come across people where the mother or the father was only 10 years old when they had their child. I don't think that was right. Now, some of the trees in there on the famous person side has been officially tracked back to that relative. So what you then have to do is confirm your side of the tree. So yeah, weird and wacky things. So finding out things. Get quirky with Google Earth. Try visiting your ancestors' hometown or old homes with Google Earth. It's a unique way to explore their neighborhoods and feel connected to places you may not have a chance to visit. If you get a chance to visit them, go visit them. If you don't, then at least with Google Earth, you can zoom in there and go and have a look and all of that sort of thing. Try reverse name searches. So instead of searching for something like William Smith, try Smith William. Some older records listed the names backwards. And so this can, and like census reports, it's always the last name first and then the first name. So this can help maybe find some hidden entries, some hidden records on those ancestors because they've got it filed under last name, first name instead of first name, last name. This one I thought was really cool. This is a cool one, a cool, wacky one. I went searching for different ideas for this for today. Imagine your ancestor on social media. Think about your ancestors' what your ancestors' profile might look like. What photos, events, and likes would they have? And it just sparks idea, and it's a creative exercise that will help spark ideas on where to search next, especially if you're having like you've come up against a brick wall. And you just need to use some creativity to try and get under it, over, around it, through it. So imagine that your ancestors on social media, what would their profiles look like? What photos and events or likes would they have? And maybe through that, you could turn and go, oh, that's right. Somebody mentioned they belonged to the society, or somebody said that they were part of the garden club, or somebody said that they were that they used to work with this organization. And I think that organization has an association. So maybe I can go back in records and see that. So it can spark other ideas on when to look. Check unusual records like asylum or prison records. Sometimes ancestors can be found in the unlikeliest of places, and these unique records can reveal fascinating stories of resilience or adventure. And when you're looking at the prison or the asylum records, on some of them you can find out why they were admitted to the asylum or the prison. And sometimes it's for the craziest of things. I mean, some of it is heartbreaking when you do read like the asylum or some of the prison things. It can be heartbreaking reading them. And sometimes it's sort of like, wait, what? They got admitted for that? Really? Seriously? So you do get that. Search for pets or animals. Some old photos, census records, and diaries mention pets or farm animals. Pets' names, and animal roles in the family might lead you to stories or documents that were otherwise easy to miss. I have never gone searching for a pet or animal name, but it's a very interesting idea for a wacky search one day. I'm going to give that a go, especially if they had pets and you know what those pets' names were. Investigate tall tales and family myths. This is something that I absolutely love doing. Dig into those quirky family legends, even if they seem far-fetched. Because most stories that are out there, myths and legends and stuff, may have a kernel of truth in them. And so then it leads you to some really cool discoveries. I have a client who says, oh, we share this name. I must get permission to be able to use this, but I haven't done that yet. So I can't give any names. But she says, oh, in my family tree on this side of the family, it was her dad's side of the family. She said, my second great grandmother had this last name. Are we related to this particular famous person who also has this last name? And I said, well, you won't be a direct descendant because he never had any kids. And she's like, oh, thank goodness for that. But in searching her second great grandmother, we uncovered a whole bunch of other stories. We have not yet found the link to this famous person, but we found links to other famous people along the way. And not only that, her third great grandfather wrote a newspaper article that was done over like 3 parts about his childhood and about how they moved from one state to the next and how integrated their life was with this other famous person that came into their lives. But not only that, his third great grandmother was the sister-in-law to this famous person's daughter and his niece. And so it was just sort of like, really? And so like I went back in there, I'm like, this can't be right. So I went back in there and I researched it over and over. I researched it again to make sure I had the right stuff. Like I put everything I knew about that person aside, and then I went in with fresh eyes, left it for a couple of days, then went back in with fresh eyes, looked at all the different records again, went searching, tried different records and stuff, came up with the same results. And I was like, oh my gosh. So, and then I was able to combine the two searches together to create the one record for this one person. But doing things like that, it's amazing what you will find. And you find all sorts of stories in there that come out. And then the third great-grandfather had a brother who had a daughter that got married into a famous family. Well known, although they were in a completely different state, but the husband started off in this area that was related to a certain event that was taking place. Now, I haven't found if he's actually connected to the families that were involved in that incident, that event. But he was in that area at the time that stuff was that event was happening. So there could be a connection in there. Then found out that that her fourth great grandmother got kidnapped by Indians and taken up to Canada and sold as slaves. And somebody then 20 years later finally found them and released them. And meanwhile, her husband, she had left a 1-year-old baby behind, but her husband had been away fighting a war. He comes home, finds his wife's been kidnapped. So he starts a search for her. He finally finds out where she is, and she makes it home. And because this doctor ended up buying all these women slaves and then setting them free. So they had to make it from Canada down to Virginia, where she was living at the time. And so she finally gets home, and her 1-year-old son from 20 years ago opens the door to meet her and says that her husband, his father, had found out where she was and had left to go get her. So she gets a horse and goes to try and find him. She comes across these people who are up on this little knoll somewhere in Virginia. There's no record of where in Virginia this took place. And so she goes up to ask if they've seen her husband, and that's who they were having a funeral service for. So the article said that they allowed her a few minutes to look upon his face before they continued with the service. But he had arrived in this town as a stopover on his way to go and get his wife, and succumbed to a fever that he contracted somehow. And so they were holding a funeral service for him. So after 20 years away, you finally find your husband and he's dead. I'm like, man. So that happens somewhere in Virginia. We don't know where. But there's just all these stories. And as we're going back, more information. And then we found a document that was published in 1942, a book about this family that was published in 1942. And this was like the acknowledgements for the people that were involved in this research. One person compiled all of it, but he had different people in different places actually going in and looking and researching physical records. Because, of course, 1942, no computers, no nothing like that. You actually had to go and you'd have to write letters off to certain places, or you'd have to find somebody in that area that you knew that could go do the research for you. And then they brought all the research back. And in this thing, it has her line, my client's line was on there. And then this person that she thought she wanted to know if she was related to was on a different line. So the main people were labeled A, B, C, D, E, F, G down the list. And I think her family came on A and the other one came on G. And underneath A, it had something like that. There is a possibility that A and G may be connected, but we haven't found that connection. Maybe, and it even said maybe in future, later in the future and stuff, the resources will be available for us to be able to find that connection. So I'm sort of like, oh, I have a challenge. So, weird and wacky. I tell you the stories that come up, and this was just in one family. That was in one family on one branch of just going back on the second, the third, the fourth, fifth, great grandparents and stuff, and finding all this information. It is amazing what you can find. Let's see. Try translating names to other languages. So if your ancestors immigrated, try searching for their names in the language of their homeland. So instead of, for example, looking for the English version Baker, maybe you can have, maybe they might have been German Bacher. Actually, I had a Mr. Bacher, but he was Dutch. He taught us how to say his name. And we used to, and there was one part of our class, this is interesting when you have, and I was at school and we had 3 different grades, if you want to call them that, for a better word, that were in the one classroom that he was teaching. It was a brand new school, had just opened. My brother was across the courtyard in another school, another classroom, but in our classroom we had the top 3 levels of the top 3 grades in the school were in this one classroom. And there was like 30 of us in this classroom. And he had, my group was over here because I was the youngest in the young people's one. And then he had the next one and then the next one. And there's been times that he would teach all 3 levels at the same time. And there were other times that he would do specific for each. He would give assignments out, and then he would teach this group over here, or teach this one over here, or teach this one here. But there was, in social studies, we were always talking. I remember we did the Black Plague era in Europe when the Black Plague hit. And him being Dutch, he was also teaching us Dutch as well. I can't remember any of it now. All I know that his last name was Bacher. It looked like Baker with 2 Ks, but it was Bacher. We had to get that little horsey thing going in the back of our mouth. But whenever we came to class, we had to say good morning to him in Dutch. And when we left at the end of the day, we had to say good afternoon to him in Dutch. And then there was a class that he would teach us in Dutch. But it was all around the Black Plague era of European history. It was really, really cool. But that's about all I remember from that class. Oh, I did win the math quiz one time, and it was against somebody who was 2 grades higher than me, and it was 11 times 11, and I shouted at 121, she shouted at 122, and I got to wear the crown, the math crown for the week. I was just like absolutely elated. It was awesome. Yeah, because we were tied, and that was basically the tiebreaker question. It's amazing what you can remember. So there's all these little tales. So try looking for, did they come from Germany to start with? So maybe you need to translate the English name into what was the German equivalent, and do research that way. If you get stuck on one's ancestor, if you get stuck on one ancestor and dig deep. So choose one ancestor at random, maybe one with a funny name or an interesting location. Now I will tell you, funny names, you might think, that should be very easy to find, and spend 30 minutes focused solely on them, exploring any source that you can find. One of the names that comes up in my ancestry, and I can't remember if it's mum's side or dad's side, was Patience. The first name was Patience. And I'm like, okay, I can search that. And it didn't strike me as a weird name, because I had actually in school one year, I had Patience Simeon was her name. There was a girl in our class, her name was Patience Simeons, and she lived on the next block over from us, on the next street over from us when I was at school. So I always remembered that name because it was such an unusual name at that time. And then when I'm researching genealogy, I'm coming across some ancestor of ours that was Patience. And I was like, oh, and I immediately thought of Patience Simeons. And so you never know where things come from. And so it made it a little easier. But even if you have an unusual, I thought Eakins was an unusual last name until I start going researching English records and find out that Eakins is almost as common as Smith and Jones. And then, of course, you throw in George, John, James, William, and Thomas as the top 5 most commonly used first names that go with the last name of Eakins. And yeah. It's like, oh my gosh, there's so many. It's like looking for John Smith. If you use Thomas, James, John, William, and who did I forget? George. If I used any of them with Eakins, it was like looking for John Smith. I am not making that up either. I can show you them all in my tree. It's unbelievable how they're all there, and they're all around that same time period and things. It seemed to be the most common names to use, because a lot of times they would also have the juniors, and then they would have, or they'd put the first name of the father as the middle name of the first son or something like that. And there was a lot of them. And then on the female side, we had Marys and Elizabeths, because they quite often got married to a Mary or an Elizabeth, and Sarah. Mary, Elizabeth, Sarah, and was there another one? Those are the only ones I can think of at the moment. But Mary, Elizabeth, and Sarah were the most common wife's names that they got married to. And also, if they were born in Eakins, Mary, Elizabeth, and Sarah were also common names to be used with Eakins as well. But then wives' common names were also Mary, Elizabeth, and Mary, Elizabeth, and Sarah were the most common names as well. So yeah, you never know, I tell you. But if you have somebody that has a wacky name, or looks like a wacky name, or a very unusual name, go search it and see if there are records that will come up with it. Sometimes you may be surprised at how popular that name might be. So go and have a look for, if you know, look through your tree and find somebody with what looks like an unusual name, and go see how many of those people you can find. And if you can find any records that relate to that particular person that is in your tree, and then how many times does that name come up that is not related to your tree? Because yeah, you never know. You never know. But anyway, so those are some ideas for wacky searches on our Wacky Wednesday. So go out, have a super fantastic sparkling evening, and we will catch